Hi guys. All right, so today my plan is to only do one video. This one may be slightly longer than one of the like part ones, part twos, right? But I'm hoping generally it will be shorter in total, if that makes sense. I'm asking a little less of you today, time-wise. Also, you're looking at my face. Apologies for that. I feel like screen cap, which is the thing where you just watch me type and talk at you, right? I feel like that can probably get a little boring, a little hard to watch. So I am going to try to vary these up. Um, so here we go. To begin with, and I know I probably say this every time, but I want to remind you, because this is hosted on YouTube, I cannot post any videos whatsoever with any copyrighted material. So we're going to talk about the documentary. That's pretty much all we're going to do. So I would very much recommend having that up on a separate screen, or if you're watching this on a laptop or something, a separate tab, because we're going to reference that a couple times as we go. I will give you timestamps to help you navigate that. But again, if I even include like a 2-second clip, YouTube, the robots therein, they will find it, they will take the video down immediately. It's kind of impressive, actually. I've accidentally done it a few times, and it's immediate. So yeah, can't do that. It would be helpful. It would really help us, but that's the world we live in. All right. So to begin with, all I want to do today, the reason I want to focus on the film, up to now, we've talked about it a bit, sort of as I've tried to introduce you guys to some of the more important mechanisms when it comes to analysis, writing these papers, namely how to quote, when to quote, and the sort of early stages of that process, right? And again, I want to underscore the fact that that stuff is important. It's not going away. But all I want to do today, and we're going to do it somewhat extensively, is look at a couple scenes from the documentary and think about how we might actually talk about them in the paper. Also, because all I have is my face and my big dumb words, I know a lot of you probably don't take notes as I have physical classes, I have face-to-face classes, I see students not taking notes. I would very much recommend you take notes. It'd be a good idea. Anyway, to begin, go ahead and pull up The Social Dilemma if you haven't already, because there's 2 scenes we're going to look at, and some of your memories may be impeccable, but I would still recommend checking those out. To begin with, 20 minutes into the movie, and all my timestamps are approximate because it won't give me strict timestamps for some reason. But the timestamp I have for this scene, it's 20 minutes even into the film. You'll know you're in the right place because it's Ben, the sort of brother in the film, right? It's Ben sitting on a couch at his high school, very fancy high school. It's we're not going to really talk about this, but it's interesting to me how every movie, every show, everything you ever see, for the most part, all these kids live in the most opulently wealthy places you've ever seen. Like we didn't have couches at my high school. I don't know about your that's very foreign to me. But anyway, he's on a couch with his buddy. I assume they're teammates because we find out at one point Ben's on the soccer team, right? So I think that's the jacket he's wearing. His buddy, like it's warm-up gear, right? Anyway, they're both hanging out. They're both talking to each other. 20 minutes in, that's the scene. And they're talking about Rebecca, who's the, I guess, love interest or whatever. You only have to watch from there to the end of that scene, which is it kind of starts to fade out from those 2 characters, and there's music playing, and they're not talking to each other. So I'll give you a beat here. If you want to pause, go watch that scene. We're going to talk about it. I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Go ahead and pause. I'm hoping you did that. I never know, right? That's the weird part about this being so one-sided. I never know if you do anything that I ask. It's unsettling. Anyway, all right, so let's sum up that scene real quick. I talked about the sort of end caps to it. At the very beginning, Ben is talking to his friend. His friend says, "Hey man, it's Rebecca, go talk to her." And we very quickly get the impression that Ben is into this girl, right? And we're like, oh, cute, okay. What happens? We dive into the sort of phone world, social media world. It's not always clear to students, so I want to explain it very briefly. Those three characters that are all played by the same actor. He's a guy from Mad Men, if you're familiar with that show. That's the algorithm. He's supposed to be the algorithm that all these experts keep talking about. And he kind of plays different parts of the algorithm, I guess. So one of the characters he's playing is always trying to get Ben's attention. The other one is trying to sell Ben's attention. And the other one, because there's three, I forget what that one does all of a sudden. I think he's more involved with suggestions, maybe. I'm using my memory there. Sorry about that. Anyway, but he's the algorithm. So we go from Ben's friend being like, "Hey man, talk to that girl. You know, let's say hi." His phone goes off, says a totally different friend somewhere else, waved, you know. And what happens? He stops talking to his buddy. He starts checking his phone. And again, that's not a huge deal, but I think one of the points the scene is making is as soon as that happens, everything changes, right? He does not talk to his friend at any other point in that scene. It's over with. And then, and I think this is intentional, the algorithm notices that Rebecca is nearby. So he gets a post from her, right? Like a picture with her dog, pretty standard Instagram type stuff, right? And he's like, oh, cool. Why are we doing that? That's the first, and there's a little more to the scene, but my hope is as we do more and more of this, moments like this will jump out to you, right? That has got to be intentional. Like what point, before we talk about rhetoric, which is our job, what point do you think the filmmakers are trying to make here? His buddy is like, hey, that's the girl you like. And I think, I would imagine to most of you, it's pretty clear to me, she's into him too, right? It's like, go talk to her. Instead of talking to her, he sees a post from her and he just starts looking at that. But she's over there. Like her Instagram, who cares? She's over there. Go talk to her over there. What's that? Why? What's the point to that? What do you think they're trying to say about Ben's relationship here with social media? Like how it's affecting him, how it's affecting his relationship with other people, right? It seems to be, in this moment, a substitute, a distraction. Both of those things, I suppose, right? That post of Rebecca takes the place of Rebecca, which feels backward, right? Like, I mean, yeah, he's looking at it because he likes her, you know, fine. But it's like, but if you like her, she is supposed to be what you're in this for, right? Like, on some level, who gives a shit about the post? Like, yeah, cute dog. Who cares, right? That shouldn't. And yet, it takes precedent. So much so that at the end of the scene, as I mentioned before, when it kind of starts panning back, so you see more and more of the scene. What's going on there? Ben's on his phone. His buddy's on his phone. You even, if you stick around for just a second before the scene ends completely, some girl just walks by in the background. Everybody's on their phone. No one is talking to each other. I imagine you guys are actually pretty used to this sort of thing. I see it a lot. I'm not saying I'm not guilty of it myself, but why are we doing any of this? What point are we trying to make, and how are we trying to make that point? All right. I started in on the main idea, I think, and I'm hoping you agree. Like, it seems like the filmmakers really want us to think about, they keep talking about attention, they keep talking about sort of where we're focused when we're on the phone, obviously, but even when the phone is nearby, right? And here, I mean, really what they're suggesting is sometimes you miss out. Like Ben is, in no uncertain terms, just missing out on talking to the girl that he's into, that is into him. I'll tell you what, man, personal experience, that's not an everyday phenomenon. You know, you want to, You want to take advantage of that stuff, go talk to the girl. And it gets in the way, right? Of him just living his best life, I suppose. So what's the effect of that? What's the effect of him getting this post? Which again, oh, and I should say this too. Some people take umbrage with some of the terminology they use, like obviously he's using like a knockoff Instagram in the documentary, right? They can't use Instagram, they can't use Facebook, they can't use Twitter. They have to pay money for those things, right? And also, they're not talking about any of those companies in a very glowing light, so I can't imagine they'd give them permission. So they got to use things that look like them, right? But what's the effect of that even, of Ben using an app that is pretty obviously supposed to be like Instagram or something? To me, we talked a little bit, I think, if not the last video, the video before, we talked about intended audience. And I mentioned how I think some parts of the film are meant for you guys, and some parts of the film are meant for people that are older than you, like me. This scene, I think, is primarily meant for you guys. Even when it shows you what he's looking at, the post that's again supposed to be like Instagram or something like that. What's the effect on you? Like when you see that and you're like, I recognize that, right? You may not even have that conscious thought, but somewhere in your brain you go, that seems right. Like that feels real, you know? It feels plausible. Like if that's never happened to you, that's definitely, you've seen it or you've experienced something like it, right? It feels like real life. Why do that? Why, I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. Why convey the idea that they're trying to convey to you about distraction, about this sort of getting in the way, substituting for real life stuff? Why convey that idea through a medium that feels like your life? Do you see what I'm saying? Apologies for the cat. It's distracted me. I don't know if it's distracting you. How are we going to talk about that in a paper? Well, to me, and sorry, the light's messing with me too. To me, one idea would be, and again, all of this is how are you going to make an argument about the film, about the rhetoric in it, if you feel like this moment with the sort of Instagram screenshot that they give you, right? One idea would be that it is somewhat realistic. It feels like something that could happen just every day in your life. If that's the case, might they be trying to extend that idea to the entire situation? To translate that, what I mean is, if you see that screenshot and even just a little bit, that kind of resonates and that it kind of says to you, yeah, I know what that feels like. I'm doing that right now. Like some of you have told me you'll watch the movies that we watch in class while on your phone. I'm like, you're not watching the movie. You're existing next to the movie. But that's kind of what's going on, right? Like he's on his phone. He's not really seeing the situation that's around him. He's not really in the situation that's around him, even as much as we are as an audience, because we're apart from the phone, because we're watching the movie, if that makes sense. We see what he's not seeing. We see what he's missing. But again, all of that is brought home. All of that is conveyed to us through a lens that we live every day. Does that make sense? I'm hoping that's not too convoluted the way I explained it. To try to put it into a sentence, and again, this is how your paper would work. What evidence are we going to cite? Well, what I keep focusing in on, I guess unintentionally, is that shot of Rebecca with her dog, the very clearly like Instagram type app that he's using, and how, you know, realistic that is. And I mean, as far as like movies go, that's a pretty, I think, realistic depiction of an app like this. What's the effect of that on the audience? And there's always different arguments, right? But one that strikes me is, it seems like a pretty good mock-up, like a pretty good, you know, this is basically Instagram type of app. Why are they doing that? What's the effect of that? I would argue it resonates with its audience because it's something they recognize. More to the point, it's something they recognize from their own life, right? So they relate to it as well, like in a very real way. Well, then why are we doing that? Might we argue that the filmmakers are trying to get you to then relate to the larger idea present in the scene? You see what I'm saying? So to walk you through the steps again, you start with the evidence, which is the Instagram mock-up, okay? We recognize it, we relate to it because it's something we live every day. So it kind of sticks with you in that way. The main idea of the scene, which is he's distracted by apps like this. He misses out on the girl that he's into, that she's into him. Like, oh my God, dude, it kills me every time I watch a scene. Like, just go talk to her. But I won't even say won't. I would, to defend him, I would say he can't, right? Once he gets that notification, he's kind of screwed. Because it's got its claws in him in some kind of way. That obviously gets worse as the film goes. But again, the argument we're making isn't, you want to think about the ideas that the film is trying to convey, but our job, 75% of our job at least, is to think about how it's conveying them. And you use specific details, you use specific evidence. In this case, that Instagram shot, right? And again, there's all kinds of different elements in the scene. Another one that I like that I don't have written down here, but just to remind you, there's even a moment later where he's talking to Rebecca in class, and like she tags him in a photo, and he's like responding to her. But that's really their only you kind of see what their conversations are like. And again, I imagine many of you can maybe relate to some of this more than I can. But you never see him talk to her. He never just goes up. They're feet apart. I know he can't talk to her in the scene I'm talking about because they're in class. But in moments where he could, there's even a moment later in the movie when she tries to talk to him, I believe. And he kind of brushes her off because he's on YouTube. And it's like, dude, just talk to this girl, right? But again, in moments like that, what's the idea being conveyed? Pretty much every scene with Ben and Rebecca, it's you idiot, right? But how is it conveying them? Mostly in those scenes, it's, if I could say it in a different way than I've said it thus far, he's just missing his actual life, sort of in exchange for this virtual one, right? Like he is talking to Rebecca, kind of, right? Like, isn't that kind of the truth that's behind these scenes? Is like, no one is ever saying he doesn't interact with her. He absolutely does, but kind of, especially when they're in the same room. So many you guys have told me stories. My classes have told me stories about hanging out with friends, but never actually talking to each other, right? They'll just be like texting each other, or they're on Instagram together and they might message, and it's like, but you're sitting next to each other. Like you could just, and they're like, yeah, but this is what we're used to. So again, the point I'm making here is I think those little touches where we see the screenshot, or we see, there's even little jokes like throughout, like there's a joke in one of those scenes about the eggplant emoji that I'm sure you guys caught. I think that stuff is for you. I think the film is trying to throw you a bone occasionally, like to try to have you relate to it in some way, or have you understand certain elements in a way that I really can't. Again, I'm not the audience for those moments in the same way that you are. I'm just not. So again, the question would be, what is the effect of those moves? If you want to think of it that way. The filmmakers are putting these in to have some kind of an effect on you, I think. So what is that effect? How does it play into some of the larger arguments they're making, right? That's what we're doing in this paper, and that's how you're going to start building these body paragraphs, okay? One more scene I want to look at. The timestamp. Oh, and again, just to reiterate, I only talked about like a few things in the scene we just looked at. There's all kinds of stuff you can dig into in the same kind of way. But again, depending on what details you consider, that's going to shape your argument, because they're all going to have different effects. Like the music is sometimes interesting. I just want to point that out. Not every student is comfortable talking about the music, which is why I don't spend a lot of time on it. but it can absolutely shape your opinion of a scene or how it affects you. We have this really goofy idea now. I think I've seen it called like emotional manipulation. Some of you may be familiar with this. Like you'll go see a movie and basically there's sad music playing or there's exciting music playing and it's supposed to make you sad or make you excited or what have you. And people, some people are citing that as emotional manipulation, like it's a bad thing. And it's like, you know what movies are, right? Like they're supposed to manipulate you emotionally. That's what art does. So the point I'm making is everything in this film is fair game, and it is sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally, but you can argue about either one, trying to necessitate a response from you. It's trying to affect you in some kind of a way. And all I want you to think about in your homework and your papers is how that is. Let's do another example. So a little bit later in the film, sorry, gotta do one of these. A little bit later in the film, the timestamp I have starts at 33:50, so 33 minutes, 50 seconds in, give or take a little bit. This is a really fun scene that, again, I imagine most of you took notice of when you were watching. This is the family, so not just Ben, but his whole family. They're sitting down for dinner, and the mom has decided, because she's been kind of clearly toying with this idea up until this point in the movie, she's decided they're not going to have phones at dinner. They're going to like talk to each other and do some of the very things that I was just saying Ben wouldn't or couldn't do with Rebecca, right? Just go talk to her. It doesn't seem like he's capable. Well, the mom's like, we're gonna do this as a family. This is a good thing to do. Some of you may have experienced something similar to this, you know. So what happens? They sit down. She goes a step further. She buys a time locked safe. She puts their phones in there for an hour, and she's like, so no phones for an hour. What happens? They sit down. They have nothing to say to each other. They can't talk to each other. So that's interesting. We're gonna have to think about that. But then, of course, the big moment in the scene, Isla, the youngest daughter, sneaks off. I don't know if everybody caught this. She says she needs another fork. That's like the worst lie ever. Nobody notices, but she walks over, smashes the safe, wearing goggles, which I think is actually pretty comical. Runs upstairs with her prize, ha ha ha. And that's kind of end of the scene. So what would we focus on? Well, there's a lot actually in this scene, right? To begin with, one of my favorite moments, again, is the mom. I should point out when she says they're not going to have phones at dinner. I'm paraphrasing there. I don't know if everyone caught this. She seems hesitant when she says it, like she seems unsure. I would be curious how some of you would read that. Like, I think there's a couple ways it could go. The way I'm given to read it is she's worried it's a dumb idea, you know, like I get the impression she feels self-conscious as she's saying it. She's like, and we're not gonna have phones at dinner. So, and you get the impression she feels silly doing this, which is interesting because, well, number one, why do you think that character would feel silly saying that? To me, I mean, one of the primary possibilities is, I mean, number one, it's pretty clear she wants her phone too, right? But I think that character recognizes that everyone, her included, but everyone in the house is not going to like this idea. From there, you're kind of in like pretty big hypothetical territory, but it seems like she's worried. Like, it seems like that character thinks this is a good idea. Obviously, that's why she does it. But she's worried that it's not going to go well, or she's worried again, that even she doesn't really want to do it. Like, if you have a good idea for you and a couple people, but you don't even want to do it, like, how do you think that's going to go? Probably about how it goes in that scene, right? Like, not well. And even before Isla breaks the safe, which again is the high point, how does their conversation go? That's why she does it. She does it so they can talk to each other as a family. Let's actually stop there. Why is that a good thing? You get the impression that they haven't been talking to each other as a family, according to the mother, because of their phones. Why is it a good thing to talk to your family? We take that for granted, right? We just assume, you should probably talk. Why? We would have to talk about that if we were going to talk about this moment in the paper. Well, you get to know your family more. You relate to them more. And when I talk to my boys, I mean, they're small. I just ask them how their day was. Why am I doing that? Does it really matter how their day, my 6-year-old and my 4-year-old? No. When my 4-year-old, I'm like, did you sing? Did you dance at school? Did you play? And he's like, yeah, we played on the slide. But it's relating to him, right? And it's hopefully having him understand that I care about his day, even if, I know he's just doing 4-year-old stuff. That's what they do. It's showing that you appreciate that person and their time and all that stuff, right? Like, that's really what it is. So the mom is saying, we haven't been doing that with each other as a family. That is kind of a big deal. It does feel like you're missing something when you're not having that. So this is her attempt to fix it. The phones have gotten in the way again, right? Like, that's kind of the big idea here. And the mom is trying to address it. Well, they sit down, they try to talk, and they can't. They're just like picking at their food. They have nothing to say. Why? I mean, it's pretty easy, again, to assume that the film is trying to convey the notion they're so used to their phones and talking in that way. I think some of the experts would say being distracted rather, but whatever the case, that they aren't as capable, as able to sit down and just talk to each other. And again, from my experience, when I walk into a classroom, most of you guys can't talk to each other either. So I do think it's a real thing. I don't know if you recognize that, because you're in it, but it's something to think about. Again, like, is this something that you can relate to? Because on the one hand, I think this moment is for my audience, like looking at it from the outside. But if you take a step back, I think it could be for you too. It's the sort of thing like, does this resonate with your life? Does this feel applicable in any kind of way? This super uncomfortable silence that these characters share. And then, of course, I think it's Ben's phone first goes off. And he's like, I just want to see who it is. Like, he knows he can't check it, but he's like, I just want to know who hit me up. He's like itching. He's like, what are they acting like? Especially Ben and Isla, the youngest characters, right? Like, Isla walks, she destroys property. Some of my students in the past have also taken umbrage with this moment. Look, we all grew up in different households. Those of you out there who were shocked and dismayed when she broke the safe and didn't immediately catch hell, I do understand that. The household I grew up in when I was a kid, I would not have dreamed of that behavior, okay? So fine. Maybe you don't relate to that moment specifically. But part of rhetorical analysis isn't just relating to it, right? Sometimes, like in this moment, why are we doing that? Why do we have, initially, again, Ben and Isla are both just kind of like, really just almost like bobbing back and forth, just an hour? We can't have them for an hour? Like, they're clearly struggling. Isla makes the very bad lie about the fork, walks over there. You kind of see her in the background. I don't think you gotta kind of go back in your memory a little bit, but the first time you were watching the scene, if you pay attention, you can see her doing something in the background, but she's kind of out of focus. And I you see her try the safe, but she kind of gives up, you know. And then the characters start talking about politics, which is another thing we could talk about here in a moment. But the point I'm making is she's in the background, but the focus of the scene is on the family, right? And she's doing something you can't really tell, but you're watching the family. And then how do you know something has happened? You hear it, right? You can kind of see, again, you can kind of see it, but you hear it. So in a way, I would argue, if we're talking about that moment rhetorically, you register that something has happened with the family. Like you're kind of with them for just a second, which is to say you're surprised too. You're like, what was that? What? And then it dawns on you. And again, this is kind of hard to parse, but I think it's like right as it cuts to Isla, I think most of us realize what she's done. And you get there and you're like, oh my gosh, she broke it. That insane little girl broke the safe to get her phone. Why? Well, we could talk about the idea first, which is, what kind of behavior is that? Other than just a badass little kid, which I know was where some of you go to begin with. Okay, sure. Beyond that, who does stuff like that? Who cannot stand so much to be away from a thing that they will destroy property, that they will risk very real punishment? You know, who does stuff like that? The word I come to is addicts, people that are addicted, people that know usually that there's going to be consequences, that they might have to hurt people or things or themselves to have whatever it is they're addicted to. I mean, obviously we think about drugs, but there's people addicted to gambling. There's people addicted to cleaning. You could be addicted to all sorts of things. I think the idea here is Isla and Ben, less so in this scene, only because Isla kind of takes the center stage, but we see with Ben, I mean, he has his own issues, right? They're so addicted to their phones and everything on it that it kind of takes over. It kind of directs this behavior, this pretty sort of out of left field behavior. And that's kind of the idea in this moment. But again, how is it conveyed? It's a shocking thing that she does, I would assume. What's the effect of that shocking behavior on you? You know, one effect could be it damn sure gets your attention, right? Like no matter what, you're watching, you're like, oh my god, like you're sort of snapped awake, I think, in that moment. So it's kind of an exclamation point in a way. Like I could explain it this way. So a lot of the movie, because it is a documentary, is people talking and not super intense, I guess. Like in game, this documentary is not, right? But this moment, and maybe a very small handful of others, are exclamation marks, are louder than the other moments. So again, what's the effect on the audience? One effect, as I said, it kind of snaps you to attention. It tries to make the point very forcefully. And given the idea, this idea about being addicted and the way that addicts will behave, maybe having an exclamation point there drives the point home further. Do you know what I mean? Another way to think about it, and again, I want to be clear, I'm not ever saying you want to make all kinds of different arguments in your body paragraphs. What I am saying is you have different options, okay? And I just want to illustrate some of those for you. So instead, you might argue that her behavior in this scene is so outlandish, is so over the top that it doesn't seem realistic, you know, which is possible. I mean, again, the goggles especially, that's kind of silly. I understand why she does it. It is probably a good idea, but it is almost ridiculous. The goggles, she's like, it all of a sudden it feels like a TV show a little bit, you could argue. So in that moment, instead, you might read that scene as too much, basically, right? It's possible to do that. I'm of a mind that even though I think it gets, I may be in the middle of the road. There may be a third option. I'm of a mind it may come very close to being too much, but given the scene itself, given how it's going, given how young she is, right? I mean, let's remember Isla is what, 12, 13, something like that. Her behavior is at least plausible, right? Do all 13-year-olds act like that? No. Do some of them? For sure. So, you know. And my point there is, if it's plausible, my wife has a cuckoo clock. I gotta wait, because that's ridiculous. Okay. If her behavior is plausible, then doesn't that suggest this kind of behavior is plausible in her age group generally when it comes to these devices, when it comes to, again, the word I keep coming back to is being addicted. Maybe. And that would be the argument that maybe I would make in my body paragraph about that scene, about that moment. That's how we're going to build these papers. I want to give you one more moment from the scene. Again, I just want to sort of drive the point home that you're not talking about an entire scene. You would need some of that for context, but we're going to focus on details just like we've done thus far. My other favorite moment from the scene is, again, it's right after they sit down. The mom says, we're going to talk to each other. We're not going to have our phones. Okay. Dad kind of laughs at her. I think I forgot to mention that before, but he also thinks this is a bad idea. He's like, all right, cute idea. You know how dads are. I know I do it, probably. Anyway, there's silence. And then the dad's like, hey, let's talk about politics. The mom's like, Jesus Christ, why are we doing that? Why would that be what we would talk about with our kids? What's that about? This moment, I don't think is as much for you guys. I think some of you could relate to it. Not least of which because, I mean, this movie is a couple years old now, but especially recently, politics and political discourse has been a little more at the forefront, so it may have come into your worldview just a bit. But also, you're 20-ish. I would hope it's not the thing you think about all the time. But that's kind of the point the mom is making, right? Like, she's like, why are we going to talk about this with our children? Like, this is not the time or place for that conversation. Why? Why do you think, and again, at this moment in the movie, we don't know that things are going to go so south for Ben, right? In that particular regard. But even so, maybe, I want to be careful how I word this. I don't think the mom is worried that Ben is going to end up at a rally and get arrested like that. But what is she worried about? Like, why do you think the parents, in this case the mom, is, I think, trying to shield the kids just from any of that, from knowing very much about it, from even having to think about it, right? Because I feel like that's what's going on. I mean, as a parent, because again, I think this moment is a little more for somebody like me, you don't want your kids having to worry about that stuff. There's a question of, like, almost what should childhood be like, right? And again, I know Ben is probably 15, 16, something like that, but he's still a kid. What are kids supposed to worry about? He's supposed to worry about Rebecca and chemistry class. You know, he's got enough stuff that should be important to him, but kid stuff. You know, and let him be a kid and let him not worry about what ends up being some very serious stuff, right? When you see the I guess protest he ends up at, and anytime cops are around and they're getting pushed, like, that is a serious moment. So the notion that she wants him to remain a kid, and why parents would do that. And again, the implication is the political discourse that's happening in the film is adult, is part of the adult world, I suppose. But it also, you see in later scenes, is infectious almost. It's like a contagion, and it takes over Ben's life primarily because he doesn't understand it, right? He assumes it's on YouTube. He assumes the people that are talking to him, I guess maybe have his best interest at heart, or because they say things like that, right? It's another interesting scene that might resonate with some of you. Just because someone is on the internet and says they care about you doesn't mean they care about you. That's not real. But it kind of takes over, right? And you see in some pretty hyperbolic terms why the mom is worried about this. But again, to take it back to rhetoric, what is the effect of that moment when the dad launches into, let's talk about these wackos? And the mom is like, what the hell is wrong with you? Why is that the only thing they can talk about? Is the real question. You know, on the one hand, you could say, well, the mom and the dad, they're adults. They've had to ballpark it in their 40s or something. Maybe that's what those people talk about. It is. It's not always, actually. I think the easier argument to make here, again, if we're thinking about what ideas the filmmakers might be trying to convey, the mom just took away their phones. They all had them. It feels like this is trying to harken back to another part of the conversation some of the experts are trying to have about polarization, about sort of being so dialed into this really hyperbolic political discourse that it just kind of takes over your brain. And so what I mean is, when they sit down to talk to each other and they have nothing to talk about, what does the dad reach for? He reaches for, it seems like, what he would have been reading about and or talking about online. He goes to what he knows to talk about now, right? Like that's kind of the argument that's being had, is that no one in the family can talk to each other. They don't know how to do it anymore. What tools does the dad have left? Well, it's what works in like chat rooms or whatever, Twitter, wherever he's at, right? Sorry, I went to chat rooms. I'm older than you, but you get the point. So I guess the point I'm making here is the muscles he's kind of built on social media have invaded the muscles he should have when it comes to just relating to his children. He can't really do that now in a meaningful way, and instead he tries to have a political conversation with a 15-year-old, which is not usually a great idea. The effect of that, I think, is, again, to me, to my audience, it affects me a little bit emotionally, like that's kind of a bummer that the parents can't even, because you'd like to think they're above some of that. But now they can't even talk to their kids. They can't even have like a family dinner in that classic movie sort of way. It's just pretty sad that it would have that effect on people, and it would kind of rob them of that. I mean, that's how I would put it, right? Other ways to think about it. We've talked already about relating to these moments. You can relate to a thing in all kinds of ways, by the way. It doesn't just have to be, oh, I've definitely lived that. I've definitely had that in my life. That's one way to relate to something, but you can just understand it. You can just find it plausible. It doesn't have to be a one-for-one thing, okay? The other ways to think about some of these elements rhetorically, because we spent a lot of time talking about emotional resonance, just because I imagine that's mostly how you guys will think about this documentary, because it does have so much to do with your lives, at least most of you. Occasionally I'll get a student that's like, I don't have any social media. And it's like, oh, that's not most of you, I imagine. Other ways to think about rhetoric. You can think about credibility, which is to say, for instance, in the very beginning of the movie, we get introduced to most of the experts. They sprinkle in a few more as the movie goes, but you notice every time they introduce somebody, like they'll just be on screen talking, and you'll see kind of over here their name and their credentials, right? This guy worked at Google, blah, blah, blah. This guy worked at Twitter, da, 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 da. Why are they doing that? It's about credibility, right? Like, think of the inverse. If these people showed up on your screen and they sound like they know what they're talking about, and that is half the battle, for real. That matters. But it matters a lot more when you know a little bit of their resume, right? They're building their credibility. I think you could easily argue you're more inclined to, if not believe these people, at least listen to what they have to say, right? It carries more weight when you see those credentials on the screen. You're like, oh, this guy probably, knows what he's talking about at the very least. That matters. The other aspect of rhetoric that we haven't talked so much about, there's emotional appeal. I'm not going to give you the Greek names. Don't worry about that stuff. There's credibility. There's also reasonableness. This is what some of you guys who've maybe been taught rhetoric in high school or something, it's logos. It may have been taught to you as logic. That's inaccurate, okay? It's reasonableness is a better translation. Why is that? Well, plenty of people can make an argument that seems logical, but it isn't, because it's either factually inaccurate or they're misrepresenting something either purposely or by accident. But as long as it seems logical, it seems reasonable, like you can kind of follow from A to B to C to D, like the argument they're making makes sense. As long as that happens, you can say that it's a reasonable argument. That is rhetorically effective, okay? So again, in the scene we looked at where Isla breaks the safe, some of you will probably balk at that. That may be a bridge too far for some of you, that particular moment. At that one point, the argument the film is making doesn't seem as reasonable. That's fair, maybe so. For a lot of you though, me included, I worry that is plausible. And if that's the case for you, then that argument is reasonable. So her unreasonable behavior is a reasonable argument because it seems like something that could happen. It seems like it could be an effect of this technology and what have you. So you would read that moment differently, basically. Those are the three primary modes. Emotional appeal, which is what we've talked about really the whole time. We'll dive more into the others in the next video, but I wanted to outline them for you here. Building credibility, one of the ways to do that is through the resume stuff. You'll see some of the experts will talk about their experience, which is another way to do that. Sometimes the film will give you like statistics in different ways, which we will actually talk about next time as well. All that's about credibility, right? We believe that stuff. This isn't in the film as far as I know, but one of my favorite examples actually of credibility, you'll see online, people will post statistics or whatnot. Don't you just automatically believe statistics? How many times have you seen a statistic and you're like, oh, wow. And then you went and looked it up to verify those statistics? Probably never, or next to never, right? Sometimes that shit's fake. Sometimes it's not real. Sometimes it's completely made up. But we automatically, if there's a percentage symbol behind something, we're like, oh, that must be, wow, I didn't know, 20%, right? Like you just assume statistics are credible. That's an interesting rhetorical technique, rhetorical effect, right? Anyway, that's something to think about. And then again, finally, reasonableness. How an argument is built, how we move from one idea to another, or how we build to a single idea, because you'll see that throughout the film in different scenes. Those are the big three to think about. When it comes to your homework, the close reading, that's kind of what I was diving into today with these scenes. And really, it's kind of what we've done, been building to anyway, this entire time. Focus on a scene, or two, I guess, but I would like you to have that as 2 separate paragraphs. But don't talk about the whole scene. Pick out a detail or two And I gave you quite a few, and there were more in these scenes, by the way. We do not have time to talk about all of them. There's a lot. But you focus on those elements in those scenes. What are the effects? Do you think the filmmakers are trying to affect you emotionally? Are they trying to somehow build the credibility of their argument? Are they trying to make whatever idea they're after seem reasonable in some kind of a way? What part of the scene are you going to point to, direct my attention to, and say, this is where that's happening. Here's how it's happening, because you have to describe that for me. And here's what the effect of that is. That's all we're doing in this paper, okay? For your homework, I want you to the best of your ability, give that a real shot here, right? Some of you have really been sweating the homework. This is all practice. You know, you're allowed to be wrong. You're allowed to screw up. But importantly, I do want you to try, right? You're gonna build that muscle so that when we get to the paper, you do a better job. That is the goal here. Otherwise, that's your only homework, is the close reading. Do that. You know, be thinking more about the documentary, I suppose. If you have questions, concerns, whatever, you can always hit me up. And yeah, that's all I got. Take it easy, guys.